Hey there, business builders. Ever felt like you're running on empty even when you're ticking all the boxes on your to-do list? Today, following our previous discussions about burnout, we're shining a spotlight on the power of taking a break. Recognizing when to step back, rejuvenate, and refresh can make a world of difference in our performance and overall well-being. So, gear up for a dose of inspiration and actionable tips on embracing breaks as a strategic advantage in both business and life. Well, welcome to the Business Builders Podcast. We are your hosts. I am Brenton Gowland.
And I'm Ron Tomlin.
And if you've just joined us, we're doing a series on life-work balance, and that's what we do on the Business Builders Podcast at the moment. We focus on series, so you'll have 10 episodes on maybe business strategy and 10 episodes on marketing. We like to really cover a topic in depth, and I think this topic's really, really important. And Ron and I have been getting feedback from people that we've been talking to about how much this topic of life-work balance is important in people's lives right at the moment. And today, we're going to be talking about the importance of taking a break. And how did this one come about, Ron?
Well, when we first started this series, you and I were talking about the fact that I prioritize taking a break in my life because I found that if I don't, I'm not as effective. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. One of the things that I've noticed in a lot of people in business in particular is there's this sort of myth, I suppose, that I can keep going indefinitely. I'm Superman. I'm the next Elon Musk or whoever. No disrespect to Elon. And I don't need what other people need. I don't need to take a break. I don't need to prioritize myself. And it's a myth. And like all myths, we're going to debunk this one because it is, to my way of thinking, it's critical for business leaders in particular.
So today we're the Mythbusters.
We're the Mythbusters.
I was just dying to say that.
I'm not going to grow a beard and I'm not going to eat glasses, but today we're the Mythbusters.
Oh, I love those science guys. I think it's great. So that's fantastic. As I was mentioning earlier, this topic's really resonating with people at the moment. And I think the reason it resonates with other people is because it resonates with us. And in our pre-chat, I was talking to Ron, for those of you who are listening, about the fact that I'd had a couple of conversations with people who were asking about the podcast. And this one person asked, what is your podcast about? I'm really interested. And I found myself explaining it in a way that makes sense of what we are as the Business Builders Podcast. It's interesting how that happens over time. Something distills within you. And I said to this person, and it was in a coffee shop, and they were one of the people who helped run the coffee shop. And I said that the Business Builders Podcast, what is it all about? We are about looking at the business person behind the business owner, the business leader, and about helping them be a fully rounded person and not falling apart. Because there is a tendency when someone starts a business, as you were saying, people think they're heroes. I'm the next Elon Musk. And they go down this road of wanting to emulate what they think potentially is what you're supposed to do. I'm just assuming based on my own experience. But there comes a point where you crash, as we were talking about with Dr. Samantha the other week in the whole burnout cycle. But we are here. The Business Builders Podcast is here to work on helping people become fully rounded, to become a fully rounded business person. And the idea is if you build yourself, if you work on yourself, and that means working on the technical skills, like becoming a better marketer, a better strategist, a better business leader, a better manager of people, all of those things, but also managing yourself. Because if you don't manage yourself, then you can't perform well in business. So I liked that when talking with this person in the coffee shop, that we're here to help people be fully rounded. And when I said that, she was like, oh, right, I'm going to get my boss to listen to it. He really needs to listen to it. And I think that's interesting that, employees and people behind the businesses recognize in their bosses that this particular person was kind of indicating that their boss was frazzled and in a place where they needed to actually take care of themselves.
Yeah. And unfortunately, people do that without recognizing it in themselves. because they don't take time away from the business. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What is a break in the first place? What do I mean by taking a break?
And just before we get into it, we want this to be interactive. Now, we have started a while back a LinkedIn page, and we've been getting a few requests, and we apologize if we've been getting to those requests slowly, but we're getting on top of it now. We've just had a meeting about it. Look up Business Builders Podcast. It's a group on LinkedIn, and send us a request to become part of that group, because if you want to be giving us feedback and get interactive with us, then that is the best way at the moment to talk with us, to be part of that LinkedIn group. And we'd invite you to, one, subscribe to the podcast here and now, and also to get on board that LinkedIn podcast group. It's called the Business Builders Podcast, of course. So go to LinkedIn and check it out, and you'll hear from both Ron and myself and other members in that community. I think there's 83 now.
Yeah,
that's a good start. 83 people.
Yeah.
Couple of internationals in there.
That's what we want to hear.
Yeah.
So getting back to our topic, let's start by talking about what a break is. And to me, a break is a break in your routine. So people say, well, I meditate or I exercise. And all of those, I think, are incredibly important. But that's part of your routine, or they should be part of your routine for improving your self-care. And that should be part of what you do every day. And I'm talking about taking a break from the routine of your everyday.
Cool. And you know what's interesting about what you just said there, that meditation and other things about, well, taking care of your whole person, as we were talking about earlier, should be part of your routine. I have noticed that as people get older, like I've noticed this in my family, particularly my brother and others, is that they evolve, and all of a sudden things like meditation and self-care and the way they eat become really, really important. And I think we mentioned a while back that when your health starts to suffer, then it becomes a priority. And I think if you look at the way people progress, those things become important as people get older, because they become more necessary when they get older. So that, to me, says that if we prioritize these things, like you're talking about, like taking a break earlier or meditating earlier, then it has a longer term benefit.
Yeah. And let's be fair, that's the whole basis of the superannuation schemes. We say, look, you've got to put some money aside so that later on you don't have to worry about money. It's the same with these type of things. My wife and I, many years ago, said, we really like holidays that we were walking. So in order to continue to do that into our later lives, we better stay fit. So we're doing work now so that we can have benefits later on. But this is what we're talking about today. Don't leave it till later. And if there's one thing that really bugs me when I'm talking to business leaders, and you say, when was the last time you took a break? Oh, they say very proudly, oh, it's been 7 years since I've had a real holiday, as though that's something to be admired. And then you say, well, when are you going to take a break? Well, I don't know, when I get some time, when I'm not so busy. Unfortunately, this is when they get into problems. This is when they start having chronic health issues, when they start having problems with addiction. This is when they start having problems with relationships. You don't want to get into those situations. You want to do something on a regular basis to prevent that from happening. That's what we were talking about with Samantha a little while ago in terms of burnout. So taking a break is getting away from the routine. And to my way of thinking, 2 weeks. 2 weeks is the minimum that you should be talking about annually. I'm not talking about 2 weeks taken in 2-day lots. I'm talking about a 2-week break is the minimum. Personally, I believe 3 weeks. And this is the reason I say that. For a lot of business leaders, and I was there myself a while ago, you take let's say a 4-week break. The first week, you're coming down from the busyness of getting ready for your break. So you've just lost a week there, unfortunately. Then you might have 2 weeks where you're relaxed, where you're not thinking that much about work. And in the week leading up to going back to work in your final week of your break, you're already thinking about going back to work. So really, in that 4-week break, you've only had 2 weeks. Okay. Now you take that down to 2 weeks, you're probably only got a couple of days in the middle where you're not thinking, or you're not activated by work. So my personal opinion, if you want a week off, You got to take a week buffer on either side of it.
So that's an interesting point that you make there. There's a few things that you've said that have stuck out to me. One is about business leaders proudly saying that I haven't had a break and I've got no time and these kind of things. I wonder whether those kind of people actually know how to take a break. Is it proudly that they say that? Because I'll be honest with you, in the whole time that I was involved in running Nucleus, the advertising agency that I'm a director of, the longest break I ever took was probably 4 days or a week in 15 years.
Why is that?
I don't think I know or knew how to take a break because I didn't have a partner. I was fully focused on work. And if I had downtime, I'd be like, well, what am I going to do with it? I don't even know where to start. And I wonder, because work had become my whole life, and you talk about the fact that people get into these habits or they might start drinking and all those kind of things. Now, I was never an alcoholic. I didn't start drinking till I was in my 30s, and that might surprise you, but I was never interested in it. Didn't like wine, but someone, my mother actually.
Well, you've made up for that since.
Oh, yeah. My mother actually made me start drinking when I was 29. She read a report by the CSIRO that red wine was good for your heart. So she basically force-fed me red wine whenever I went around there for dinner.
Good old
and I started
mum.
liking it. But yeah, I think I've been under the weather, like drunk 3 times in my entire life. Like that's kind of the extent to which I drink, and they would have been accidental moments. But I did get into the habit of frequenting venues because other people were there. So a particular pub, like Cheers, where everyone knows your name, you go to that pub and you get business from those pubs, and you tend to feel like that's part of your social circle, and it is. But then I'd think, well, where would I go? Oh, I don't have a partner. I've only got work. I've got all these things. I got a few weeks off at Christmas. I'll do some pottering around and some DIY projects. But I just wonder how many business leaders are in that same position. Like, what would I do? And it might only be a few. I might have been a unique thing, but I'm not entirely sure whether what I'm saying is, are they proud about it, or they just not know how to be any different because they're so driven or worried about the fact they've got cash flow issues and, all the things.
I think you're right. I think a lot of times people, their identity is caught up in the idea of I'm running this business or I own this business, and they're afraid or maybe ignorant of what it means to be away from what gives them their identity. And maybe we could do a podcast later on about, is that really you? Because I would argue that it's not. But regardless of that, I think that there might be a fear factor. How do I have fun? It's been so long since I've had any, I don't know. But those sort of perspectives, I think, become ingrained by being totally preoccupied with your business activities.
Yeah, and I think there can be some fear involved as well, because I always used to think and be afraid of what will happen if I'm not here. And let me be blatantly honest, that means that I haven't set up the business correctly.
Absolutely right.
And sometimes you have to extend trust to your people to be able to go away. And it's okay to come back and there's some things not done the way you would have done them, because they might have done them better or they might have made mistakes. But either way, there's a learning going to be involved if you handle that properly.
Absolutely right. So let's talk about that. What are the benefits for the individual and what are the benefits for the organization of people taking breaks?
Yeah, okay.
And there are a number of benefits. I mean, in the first place, let's talk about the individual. There are leadership benefits. There are personal mental health benefits. There are physical health benefits and social health benefits from taking a break. Things like renewed creativity. Breaks allow leaders to recharge, foster creativity and their innovative thinking because they're using their subconscious mind more, or not even using it. They're allowing their subconscious mind to come to the fore because they're not focusing on day-to-day activities. When you take a break, and especially when you travel, you're getting different perspectives and it allows you to think more about the long term, the strategic. So that's a benefit for your leadership that comes from getting out of the routine of the everyday. Here's one that most people don't even think about. Distance from work helps leaders relate better to other people and therefore relate better to their team's needs and concerns when they get back.
I want to explain that a bit. Distance from work.
Yeah. So it's about developing your empathy because you're not thinking about the tasks. You tend to be, when you're taking a break, you tend to think more about relationships and people.
So the blinkers come off.
The blinkers come off from a strategic perspective, but also from a people's perspective. So there's some benefits for your leadership in just taking a break. Then there's mental health. When we talked about stress reduction when we were talking with Samantha, and just preventing burnout and lowering your stress levels happens invariably when you take a break, unless you're going with your mother-in-law, as an example. I use that advisedly. This is the one that we've talked about before with allostatic loads.
Yep.
It improves decision-making because a rested mind makes better decisions and is less prone to errors. You know, we talked about with that allostatic load that you're always switched on, but that doesn't allow your subconscious to come to the fore when it needs to. And as a result, you take twice as long to make decisions, sometimes 4 times as long to make decisions when you're under extreme stress. Taking a break is a circuit breaker for that. So you make better decisions when you get back on the job, and your focus is that much more improved because time away can boost concentration and problem-solving abilities upon return because you're refreshed. And, I think I've spoken to you about this example. I used to take a week off over Christmas, and I would say during that week, I've got a whole bunch of tasks that I could do. I'd get into the holiday, maybe extend it to 2 weeks, and I would never get those tasks done. Okay, so it was things like organizing my files, that sort of thing. When I got back, I found that what would normally take me 2 or 3 days took me 2 or 3 hours.
Interesting.
And I couldn't figure out why that was the case, but I had so much more energy. So there's not only mental health benefits, there are physical health benefits because rest and recovery, regular breaks prevent physical exhaustion and aid in the body's recovery. And we've talked about life's not a marathon, it's a series of sprints. Any great athlete will tell you that if they're looking forward to an event or they're preparing for an event, they have to take breaks in order to be able to do a series of events, take breaks between those events. So they rest and then sprint, rest and then sprint.
So it's interesting what you're saying. It's almost like the break becomes the distance from work thing that you were talking about, yes? So
absence of routine, I suppose, is the main thing.
Interesting. So I suffered anxiety when I was younger. And it was really, I remember there was someone who came and talked to me about, well, when you start a business, are you prepared for this mentally? I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I was pretty good as a consultant. I was a graphic designer who worked for different people, built websites, did all sorts of things when I was in my 20s, making good money. And then I started employing people. And this one guy came and talked to me about, are you sure that you're ready for the mental challenges? And what he was talking about was cash flow issues. I remember when I rented the first place, I would walk the streets at night because one minute I'd have $30,000 in the bank. The next day I'd have $5.
Minus 5.
No, it never went minus, thankfully. Now it's much better. But there were those times when you'd see these big cash flow shifts and I didn't get used to it, didn't understand what really cash flow planning was. You learn all that as you go along when you start a business without, let's say, and I think a lot of people in this position, they don't do the MBA or they don't do the business studies before they start a business because they have a great idea and the business studies come somewhere down the track because, now I've got to be a business leader. But anyway, my point was he said, are you ready mentally? Because the reason I was suffering anxiety is because I was getting used to all these new paradigms around me and cash flow issues and people issues and all these things. And I remember there was this one particular day, a friend of mine came to and where I was working, and I remember my heart was racing and I felt so overwhelmed with things. And this person was like, just come with me, we're going to the beach. And I went to the beach with them and everything went away. Like we just sat at the beach and had a chat and the anxiety came down, the heart rate came down, all that kind of stuff. And I remember going back to the office and approaching my computer and I felt it all just come back. and I felt my heart rate. And I thought, wow, this is actually a physical thing. And at that point, that's where I started taking these long walks around the neighborhood and just going out and smelling the roses. I think I was in my mid-30s when I did that. And just those little micro breaks.
We'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah.
What, different
were really, really important for me to get that anxiety under control. And so to put you in perspective, if you're listening, Ron spoke at the beginning about this topic about taking a break is something that, Ron taking holidays is what got us into talking about this, because I invariably had not taken breaks. And I was impressed with the fact that every 3 or so months, Ron would take a weekend off or he'd go away for a week. And I was like, wow. And Ron explained that that was something that he'd implemented in their lives as a family early on. And after some experience, I believe, of you being corrected by your wife and your family.
Yeah.
And we just thought it's so important. And so for my journey, I'm starting to challenge myself to go on breaks. And I'm lucky enough that I've met someone really wonderful a little while ago. And that person is like, we need to take a break. So now it's starting to become more important to me to take breaks, and it's making a big difference. But my point with that story is I physically saw the difference of just creating some distance between work in those early days of running a business.
And I think this is one of the things that business leaders sometimes intentionally develop is a predisposition to not listening to their physicality, not listening to their bodies, not listening to things like anxiety, because I'll tough it through. I'll just ignore that. And when we do that, we start to become immune to the signals that things are going wrong.
Yeah.
And again, I wonder whether popular business culture hasn't glorified people who can just work through, get through, and we think that's the way it should be because of these myths that have developed about what it takes to be a successful business person.
And also, I think there's some generational stuff as well. And let me explain that. So there's one company that I've been working with, and I've made some observations. And that company, a senior leader has retired and a new senior leader has come in. Now, I bumped into the previous leader of this business a while back, and they made some comments, well-intentioned and so forth, about the new person, about the fact that they would leave on time, that they would come to the business and arrive at 8:30 and leave at 4 o'clock, or do things in a certain way, where this person I knew was rocking up at 6 in the morning and leaving at 6 at night. So they would arrive when it was dark and they would leave when it was dark and not see the sun. And they are significantly older than the new person. And I think there's this generational thing that exists about the way things should be done. If you're working hard, you should be in the office. You should be seen to be working. And I know that there's a lot going on at the moment in the business world. I heard of another, we talked to Sim Penzu a while ago about the 4-day work week. And in Australia, Telstra's, I think, biggest telco, and they were talking about the fact that they're starting to experiment with a 4-day work week with their employees. So we're changing a lot.
Unilever in New Zealand have just done a pilot for a 4-day work week and found that 34% less absenteeism as a result, increased engagement and productivity, increased revenue from those people who were working on accounts where they were only working on the 4 days a week.
We might get to a point where we have a siesta on.
Well, the cultures in societies where that's the norm.
Yeah.
And they seem to have longevity in some of those societies as well.
There is change coming, but I look at the new leader and I've been around a lot of people and I put stock in this person. I think this person's got the goods. And while that other person who was running the business did their part and was committed and spent the time, I think in some senses to the detriment of their own life. You know, now that they're retired, I'm sure they'll do plenty of great things, but there's generational things I think people need to get over if we're talking to business owners who are in their 40s and 50s, that they can learn from the younger people. Reverse mentoring, right?
It wasn't that long ago within our society in Australia that there were certain attitudes, certain beliefs, certain values that we would not accept at all nowadays.
Yeah, correct.
So those things change. So why can't some of these things associated with life-work balance change?
Well, I think they need to change, because if we look at the world at the moment, there is not a lot of separation with technology, and there's not a lot of separation with work and life, and cost of living. Like, that's one of the biggest issues in Australia at the moment. And I know globally, like, we're working with people that are working in different countries. My partners from overseas, they tell me what goes on in those places, and it's not much different to Australia. It's a universal problem in the world at the moment, the whole work-life balance issue and cost of living. And cost of living drives people to not take holidays.
And that worries me a lot. When people prioritize a certain degree of affluence and lifestyle, okay, and you can argue if you're just subsisting, that's different, but over their own health, over their own capacity to enjoy their life. And let's be fair, that's what we're talking about here is life-work balance for the purpose of having a life well lived. So, and that's in the present as much as anything.
You were talking about, the benefits of taking a break. So there's benefits to the individual.
Yep. And the one I didn't cover was social benefits and in particular, stronger relationships. You've got to take time to work on your relationships, and that is easier when you're not stressed on the job. So breaking through the routine, working on your family relationships, but working on relationships with other people as well. A break gives you the capacity to do that more effectively. So when people talk about breaks, they often think about getting away, and that's great. But sometimes you can't get away for whatever reason, family situations, dogs, as I'm finding at the moment. But that doesn't mean you can't take time off away from the routine. And some of that can be involved in building relationships with friends, community, and so on.
So the other one, though, is benefits to organisation. Now, you've already talked and hinted about all this kind of thing. You were talking about Unilever and the 4-day work week, and they've been finding there's less absenteeism. So if we're talking to business leaders, business builders, and we want you to be a whole person, we want to be whole people, what do we do with our staff then? How should we be encouraging them to take breaks, Ron?
Well, I think, of course. And
but why? What's the benefit to the organisation?
Well, let me put it this way. The benefit to the organisation of you taking a break, right, an individual taking a break, is one, it shows leadership and modeling for the people who work for you. So you're setting a positive example. You're saying, I'm looking after myself. I want you to do the same. So one of the problems with the hero model of I don't need to take a break is that people think, well, to be successful, I don't either. Your people are looking at you as to how you live your life as an example for maybe how they should live theirs.
So there's another issue, right?
So this is about setting a positive example for your people.
We just talked about cost of living. I reckon some people would save up their holidays so that they can either get a bulk payment, because I know that some companies do bulk payments to pay out holidays so they don't get big packages. And then also some people save it up because they figure when they leave, they'll get a bigger payout. So if we've got an organisation, and because this is one of the things that I learned as running a business, there came a point where we had to start looking at our staff's holidays because they were building up, and we had an enforced break every Christmas of 2 weeks, but that's littered with public holidays. So in Australia, public holidays are days where people get paid to have a day off, irrespective, it's just law. And so that reduces the amount of holidays they're taking. If you tell them, well, 2 weeks over Christmas, you're going to have off, that means really you're only having 6 or 7 days on a 10-day break. My point is that as a business leader, we've got to actually, if we're interested in keeping our people, we'll have to have some policies within our business on taking breaks and
absolutely.
What that looks like.
And it's all very well to say, okay, you guys, you have to take a break, but I don't have to. I mean, that just smacks of a lack of leadership, a lack of demonstrating this is actually a priority.
How many businesses do you think have actual policies on their staff taking breaks on holidays?
Not enough.
Not enough. That's a very good answer.
Interestingly, larger organizations, I think, do, but for the wrong reasons. We just don't want the liability of all these people accumulating leave.
Correct.
Instead of, as it should be, we don't want these people becoming a problem in their own lives and to us because they're burnt out, because they're not resilient, because they haven't recharged their batteries. That's what it should be about.
Correct. But that's a whole extra layer to what we talked about with the 4-day work week. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, go back and have a look through the catalog of the Business Builders podcast. And there is an episode we did with a gentleman named Sim Penzu about the 4-day work week. And that was all about giving people life-work balance. But I think the next step to that is, how do we help people celebrate their time off? Like, how do we make it a thing where it becomes a norm within organizations?
Well, I've got to tell you, if you want it to be a norm, the leaders have to demonstrate that norm. And this is where most people learn their values within an organization, or what their organizational values are, from the leaders.
And we always used to talk about, because recruitment's a big problem for organizations, right, at the moment, because it's hard to find good talent at this particular point in time in Australia. And I'm assuming that would be similar in other places as well. But one of the things we had at Nucleus is we gave people a day off for their birthday. And I remember we did this internal brand building exercise where we asked everyone what were the things they really liked about Nucleus and where can we improve. This was back in the day. And one of the biggest things that came out is people kept talking about their birthday day off, about how important that was. And I remember thinking, that's not what I expected. I thought it, because the way that came about is, I remember being at businesses where it was my birthday and I had to pay to bring a cake in for my own birthday. I was like, this is ridiculous. And I remember thinking, look, the best birthday present I can give people is give them the day off as a paid day off, one extra day a year. And that's my birthday present to you as a business. But they loved it. And so can you imagine if you become a business that celebrates and encourages people to take breaks and to take holidays? And, there's all sorts of ways of celebrating that. You've got internal newsletters. You can have John from accounts giving his highlights of his time in the Flinders Ranges, or Mary and her time in Bali. And you celebrate that as part of a business and encourage it. There'd be a million creative ways you can do that. But that then creates a culture. And when we talked about the 4-day work week, that was one of their elements as to how they would recruit people. If they really wanted someone to join the business, Sim was saying that they would start to break out the 4-day work week conversation, because that almost had more value than money. So I'm saying benefits to the organization is beyond just the personal benefits of those people recharging, but it's a cultural thing. It says a lot about the business, as you're saying. It becomes a recruitment mechanism. There's layers and layers of it.
And the other thing too, and you touched on it before, is that when leaders go on a break, it gives the people who are reporting to them the opportunity to step up to the plate, to try the skills and the attitudes that are required of a business leader, because they have to fill in for a while. Somebody has to take responsibility. And that is a great learning mechanism for people to try before they buy, if you like, in this whole leadership thing. Some people will grab onto it and say, I want more of that, and look for mechanisms and look for opportunities to develop their leadership capabilities. Other people will say, it's not for me, and be happy that they've tried it, and it's something that it's not, they don't want to be part of their life.
Yeah.
But most importantly, it gives the organization the opportunity to give these people a sense of, I'm going to be a leader for a little while. Give these people a learning platform in terms of the leadership. And that's all often very difficult.
Well, it also bench tests the business to have I set it up correctly, or even if it's a department. Let's say you're a manager of a department and you go away. It bench tests whether you've actually set the department up well, and it shows where there's holes and weaknesses when you come back. And that's great because you learn. But it also, I will guarantee you, people will step up. If you put the authority in them and you go away, you will be surprised at what you learn about people. And sometimes the people you least expect will make you go, heck, that person's got potential I did not see before. So I think, man, there are so many benefits to, as you said earlier, getting some distance from work and allowing other people to step into the gap. Because I think a big mistake a lot of people make, and I made it for years, was not letting go and not getting away enough to allow the business to develop a bit on its own. Because if you set up the right framework for the business to grow, your strategies and other things, do you really need to run it? Do you really need to run every aspect of it? Of course not. It won't grow if you don't step back a little.
And that's what leadership is all about. I would argue that, and I heard this many years ago from a leadership development expert, that the number one role of a leader is to develop the next cadre of leaders within an organization.
To make themselves redundant.
Well, exactly. But to ensure the organization has some sustainability because it's not all reliant on me.
Yep. And that then becomes the progression of the leader, because the leader goes from being, well, a manager to a executive within the organization to maybe a COO or a CEO or whatever it is. But then the next steps is to become board members and so forth. So if you want to progress yourself, you have to grow these businesses and be willing to let it take over your role so that you can then move up.
Well, I learned that the hard way.
Did you?
Yes.
Explain that one.
Well, very early on in my career, I was leading a group of people, and I was looking for the next stage in my progression, and an opportunity came up, and I applied within an organization for that position, and I didn't get it. And I knew very confidently that I was the best person for the job. And I went to the person who was making that decision, and I said, I'm sorry, but I think you made a mistake. He said, I haven't made a mistake. I said, I think I was the best person for that job. He said, absolutely you were. And I'm disappointed that I couldn't appoint you to that job. It was a new position and a new role. And I said, what do you mean you couldn't appoint me? He said, well, you haven't spent any time developing the people who report to you so they could take your role.
Wow. That's great.
And he said, and I'm sorry, but at the moment, your role in this organization is critical. The new role is an opportunity. Your role is critical.
You hadn't replaced yourself.
And you haven't given me any options to replace you. I said, that's not my responsibility. He said, isn't it? Oh. That's interesting, isn't it? And that's where I learned that whole idea that actually the role of the leader is to develop the people underneath them so that they can step up when the time is required.
That is brilliant.
It wasn't brilliant at the time, but it was an important lesson that I learned. And I've taken that with me.
Yeah, but that's how it works, right? You learn. Right. And that's why we're here as a Business Builders podcast. So hopefully you can learn from us and the people we get on here so that you don't have to experience these things yourself.
You don't have to go through all that problems yourself.
So take a break, okay?
Yeah, please.
Now, just on that, we got to move along a bit because I think we've covered off on good reasons to take a break and why it should be important within the organization that we prioritize even our staff taking breaks. So what type of breaks are there, Ron?
Well, to me, there are three types of breaks. There are, people say, well, I take a break. I take a weekend away once a year. That's not a break. That's what I call a sustaining break. They're the type of breaks, just to get me through the next couple of months, I've got to have something to look forward to. And I've got to have something where I can just rejuvenate, the batteries are low.
Need to recharge.
But not recharge completely, but just keep me going. Just keep me going. And I call those sustaining breaks, like a weekend away, a couple of days off. But that's not enough to reset yourself and to really recharge the batteries completely. That's a rejuvenating break. Now, the first one is a couple of days. The second one is, I think, a minimum of 2 weeks.
Okay.
Right? And that's, we talked about that before. To me, 3 weeks is better. 6 weeks if you can get it, but I know that's not always easy.
Yes.
And I haven't taken 6 weeks off for a number of years for a whole bunch of reasons, but I will take 3-week breaks at a time at least once a year.
Right.
And you'll find out what your set point is. Some people might be less, some people might be more. And then the third type is what you talked about before, micro breaks. And that might be an afternoon off every now and then. It might be even on the weekends. You say, well, on the weekends, of course, the whole weekend is a break. It's not if you've got a whole bunch of other responsibilities outside your working responsibilities. I'm talking about taking some time to do things you enjoy where you feel more relaxed as a result of that than you did before.
Yeah, and look, micro breaks have been my saving grace over the years. Like I told you that I didn't take holidays for an extremely long period of time, but and it was just booking a Monday or booking a Friday off when a Monday was a public holiday. So I'd have a 4-day weekend. And that 4 days that's probably more what you were talking about as a sustaining break. But it's essentially also could be a micro break, but let's call that a sustaining break. But there's been plenty of times where I've just gone and had one meeting a day and had the rest of the day off and just gone and sipped coffee somewhere or sat on a beach or started writing, because I was writing a book at the time. I'm going to have to get back to that at some point, where I'd go and do an activity like that. It was a beach down here I used to go to, and I'd take my laptop and they had an outdoor bar and I'd sip on some like mojito or something and write a book.
Yeah, I think a good topic for one of our podcasts could be the whole idea of reflection. I think in leadership, one of the things that we don't place enough emphasis on is reflecting. Now, you could argue that the micro break is maybe a form of reflection. I don't know. And we can have that discussion later on.
Well, I think it's a little bit of that separation from work, as you were talking about earlier.
And I would say reflection is a part of your work, but not enough people actively prioritize time for reflection. So maybe the micro breaks help with that.
Maybe we call the micro break a circuit breaker, just enough to break that circuit so that you can then get back into it.
So that you can de-stress.
Yeah. So 3 types of break. You said a sustaining break.
Yep.
Give me a quick definition.
Well, a weekend away.
A weekend away. Yeah. So my book a Friday off when you got a Monday public holiday. Yeah. Everyone will try and do that. But if you think about it long enough.
Rather than taking a sickie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Rejuvenating breaks. So minimum of 2 weeks.
That's my definition. And certainly for me, 2 to 3 weeks is probably what I'm looking for because of that time to de-stress and the anticipation of going back to work, which doesn't give you time. If you're only taking a week off, doesn't give you a significant amount of time to actually enjoy that period where you can take the stress levels down.
And then a micro break. So I look for ways of taking micro breaks. So for instance, if I have to go and meet with a client in the Barossa and I'll have a couple of hour meeting, I'll go, well, what am I doing with the rest of my day? I might go and visit this display center or this little town or whatever it is on the way back. And that becomes almost like a micro break, because you may as well enjoy it if you're going to have to drive to another place, or you book a day off if you've got a fairly busy week, but you see, I haven't got many meetings on that particular day. I'll take that day off and go sit on the beach and write my book or whatever it is. So we've got 3 types of breaks, and maybe there's other types of breaks. If you're listening, as we said earlier, we really want to start getting into getting feedback from yourselves. So if you've joined, like we recommend, join our podcast group on LinkedIn, and we'll put some open posts in there that you can comment on or talk on or respond to us. But it'd be nice to hear from you if you think there's any other types of breaks that we could take.
And to finish today, as we discussed before, I would like to throw out a challenge to people.
Okay, hit me with it.
Because it's all very well to talk about this break stuff and taking a break, but so many people will listen to this and say, well, what am I going to do with that?
Right.
I'd like to challenge people to book at least one 4-day weekend away within the next 3 months.
Okay, so that's challenge number 1.
Challenge number 1.
So this is about prioritizing taking a break. And if you're listening, we're asking you to take action. So number 1 is book at least a 4-day weekend away within the next 3 months. Yep. I can do that.
Okay.
Are you going to do that?
I already have. So I'm ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Have at least a 2-week block within the next 6 months. Now, I'll make it within the next 12 months if you've just had some time off in July. I know a lot of people have, traveled off overseas during the Northern Hemisphere summer, so they're good luck to them and fantastic. You're living what we're talking about. But I would say for the rest of you, within the next 6 months, book to at least 2 weeks where you've got a block of time. And there's actually no excuse that I can think of that would prevent you from doing that. Even with, people say, well, I can't do that because with this big project on. So I'd say you have to do that because you got a big project on. This idea that taking a break is a luxury. No, it's a necessity.
Okay.
If you want to sustain your capacity as a leader, you need time to recharge.
So some people might say taking 2 weeks off, that's going to cost me a lot of money. I know I was just talking to someone the other day about coming to South Australia and they're like, oh, that's going to cost a lot. So you don't have to necessarily go away somewhere fancy.
Look, one of the things I did in my impoverished youth was after I'd been overseas, and that's probably why I was impoverished, I realized that I didn't know that much about my own city. So I took a week off, my wife and I took a week off, and we acted as tourists within our own city, as though we were here. We still lived at home, but we would go into the city or go around to the environs near us and act like we'd never been here before. Go to in our case, go to the Barossa Valley, go to McLaren Vale, go to the Adelaide Hills, take a day doing each one of those sort of things and rediscover your own area.
And that's interesting because tourists often know more about your own hometown than you do because they research it and we just take it for granted.
One of the things I often get asked is when you come to Adelaide, where am I going to stay? I don't know, because I don't stay in any of the hotels in Adelaide because I live here. There's the thing. Hotel hop for a week, just something a little bit different, a little bit interesting. Yeah. And so that you can give friends and business associates the benefit of, well, I wouldn't stay at this hotel.
What do they call that? So we really didn't talk about this, but that word staycation got really popular a while back.
It did. I think it got incredibly popular during COVID.
Yeah. So they would call that a staycation if you went and stayed in a hotel in your own hometown.
And I think that's
Or is a staycation where you stay in your home? I think it qualifies as a hotel, yeah?
Well, I'm not pedantic about that. As long as if you don't have a lot of money to go away, you don't have to go away. You can still have a break just locally at home.
Yeah,
just
great.
Break the routine. And the third challenge.
Yes.
At least one afternoon off in the next month.
Okay.
Now, some people might say...
That's a micro break, yeah?
Look, some people might say, I can't do that because the next month is incredibly busy. I would argue that's why you want to do it. When you're busy, that's when you need more breaks. I mean, just think about it. When you're under a lot of stress, that's when you need de-stressors. These micro breaks can be a great de-stressor. So, my opinion, challenge one, do that.
4 days?
Yeah, that's a 4-day weekend.
Yep.
Do that, book that within the next month. The 6 day, the 2 weeks, okay, you got a couple of months to organize it, but make sure it's in the next 6 months. And today, you can put half a day out in your diary somewhere along the line to do something that you really enjoy. Yeah.
So 3 challenges. Yep. Book at least one 4-day weekend within the next 3 months. Have at least a 2-week block within the next 6 months and at least one afternoon off in the next month. And look, I would ask that if you are listening, commit to this with us. Do this with us. I'm going to do it. And for me, it's always been a challenge. I think my partner will love this. She'll listen to this podcast and be like, so when
hold you accountable.
When are we going away? So that'll make it pretty easy for me. But we will post up in the LinkedIn group. And if you're listening to us, jump on LinkedIn, look up the Business Builders Podcast group, request access. Either Ron or I have a look at your request. We'll put you on board, but we're going to put up a post when we release this podcast and we will put the challenge there and get people to comment on, what they're going to do when they're booking their time.
Fantastic. I'd love to see people telling us about what they plan to do.
Yeah. Well, there will at least be me. So I'll be like, I'm going to book these dates. So it might just be you and me, but if you're out there and you're listening, jump on board, get on the LinkedIn group and commit with us to taking some time off because it's one of the ways that we're going to help in terms of encouraging business builders to really become that whole person we were talking about at the start of this episode.
And like I said, don't think of it as time off. Think of it as time productively spent breaking your routine so that you're more capable and productive and effective when you come back on the job. If you want a guilt-free version of it, think of it as doing something productive for being more effective when you get back to work.
Yeah. And you know what I like about doing this podcast? And we've got a few hundred listeners, so there's not thousands and thousands of people, but we see the stats and there's a couple of hundred people downloading each episode, which is great. But I love the fact that we're challenging ourselves as well. And you who are listening, come along on the journey with us. We'll challenge each other together. But I really love this fact of me being held accountable by my own words here.
Yeah, well, I'll be the one doing that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ron. Well, look, if you've been listening, we love having you listening in. We love having these conversations, and we have our sleep specialist booked in, not for the next episode, but for the one after that.
Yeah.
We've got a sleep specialist. I've had a long conversation. This person is a psychologist and is very, very good at helping people get better sleep. So I've had about almost an hour conversation with this person, and all I can say is I'm really excited for this episode that's coming up soon. So if sleep is something you want to improve.
Yeah. So to my way of thinking, breaks important, sleep critical. So looking forward to that podcast.
And on that note, goodbye.
Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me. See you later.